So let me begin. I'm delighted to join you today in such good company with Sandra Balducci and others, and Daniela Giovanni, of course, perhaps Laura. Say a few words in honor of Gigi Mazza, not only about what he said, and but also what he did in an interesting way. So I will say a little bit about his legacy to the field and its significance internationally, and then add a implication or two that I think grows out of what he did that's very important. So I'm delighted for the honor of the invitation to share some brief remarks to recognize Gigi's enormous contribution to the field of urban planning and urban planning education, of course. I'm going to suggest that we can learn from his example of practice even more than from his scholarship. Now, without being able to master the Italian of Luigi's writings, I have to leave the critical appreciation of his work to my Italian colleagues. But I can certainly acknowledge his leadership and devotion intellectually and as a matter of practical publication to the enterprise of planning theory. In the world of urban planning in the English-speaking world, Gigi changed the world. He imagined not only that a growing network of urbanists and planners in related fields shared a fascinating set of intellectual problems relating to urban growth, sustainability, transition, change, relating to issues of space and society, issues of law and governance, but he also imagined that members of those diverse fields might actually talk to one another across barriers of geography, nationality, barriers of culture and intellectual history, barriers of very different regimes of public policy. He imagined that these diverse lovers and organizers and changers of cities could learn from each other, could have a vibrant and animated and intellectually challenging and rewarding conversation. Somehow, despite all of those barriers, because of our shared fascination with and commitment to the vocation of city planning in all of its ambiguities. So what began as a planning theory newsletter soon linked us together in smaller and larger countries, in smaller and larger cities and towns, in universities and research centers that some of us had never heard of or recognized. So Gigi remapped fields of concerns as well as places. And all of a sudden, those of us concerned with planning were listening to and reading and learning from teachers and students of planning in places that only later we would Google and find out, where is this and who is this? But this didn't happen by itself. It happened because Gigi had the vision and the imagination, the optimism and the nerve to bring something new into the intellectual world, to encourage a far-flung network of like minds, to share ideas even if it would be many years before we could meet together in the same room. Gigi's inspiration of a planning theory newsletter would become the international journal, of course, Planning Theory. And it's one of the main journals in the field. And so his work truly made an international contribution to the development and vitality of the field of urban and regional planning. With my colleagues and students, whether they find planning theory captivating or not, certainly at times more intelligible than others, we all owe Gigi both gratitude and admiration. We might all aspire to make such contributions. He changed the world of urban and regional planning and urban planning education, truly. But his work on planning theory, its prospects and networks and institutions, also represents something in practice that he very likely had not actually claimed or argued or written about as a matter of theory itself. His broader practice, I want to suggest, added something to his written work that we should recognize and even study as an important, if often underappreciated element of what I have called a critical pragmatism, a critically pragmatic planning sensibility. What Gigi did as an editor was not to argue as a planning theorist, but to cultivate talent and promising contributions, to ask for proposals, to discuss possibilities, of how to act with others, how to negotiate and not to debate. This is a difference that makes a huge difference in planning, in what everybody in this room in Naples will do outside of the university. The point of researchers or scholars might be to be right, to say true things. But the point of planning is not simply to be right, but is to act well, effectively to serve people, to improve cities, to manage important transitions, not to debate, but to act together, not just to be right, but to reach agreements on how to act. And acting together means to negotiate, not to have a seminar and debate, but to satisfy interests practically and help each other move forward. A key to what I have called a critical pragmatism, a pragmatism that talks about planning on the ground with an eye to power, a critical pragmatism. A key lies not only in this difference between the debate of ideas and the negotiation of possibilities of action, but in the practical, skillful shift, the shift from debate and blame games to negotiation. We can see in this crucial move what mediators do carefully, but moderators of debate do not. Essentially, a plea for proposals, a plea for practical proposals, an always context-responsive, improvised act of listening for, paying attention to, and carefully evoking new possibilities of what we can do now. I want to stress again, this is not about debate. It's about shaping action. Right? It's not about argument. It's about negotiation, negotiating action. Good listeners more generally know that as they identify value that deserves attention, they can innovate, reframe, build new relationships of partnership or solidarity, even as your Marinella Sclavi says, change the game, act in new ways. The move at stake here is not one of technical problem solving, and it's not merely about ritual. It's context responsive and improvised with others, all the more because the passions and vulnerabilities of conflicting parties make defensiveness and blame and escalation such tempting possibilities of debate and argument. It takes determination and will and imagination not to debate, not to argue, not to try to prove that you're right, but to try to reach agreements about what to do now. Third-party planners, facilitators, mediators, all need to recognize and acknowledge these different concerns and worries, but they have to reframe arguments and even redirect them, shifting away from ad hominem insinuations or attacks or justifications. I only did this because you did that, to constructive proposals. Like mediators and facilitators in other contexts, planners have to ask for proposals, generate proposals, make possible proposals, not so much arguments, but proposals, what we can do now. So again, this is part of what I've called a critical pragmatism, and I've written about this at some length. The two books behind me, you see Daniela and I interviewed Italian planners doing wonderful work. And in the work on territorial governance that just come out, I've highlighted four planners as they improvise. Anna Marson, Patrizia Gabellini, Angela Barbonente, Giuseppe Papalardo, right? They all have been masters at evoking proposals, not at showing that they were right, not at being academic, but at negotiating practically. So Luigi did two crucially important things. He created and fostered a planning theory community internationally that anybody in the planning field has to be grateful for and has contributed, has certainly learned from, if not also contributed to. But Luigi's work, not his writing, but his work, highlighted a simple but deep point about action in planning, which has to highlight and valorize and think carefully, not about debate and knowledge, not about doing science, but about negotiation and acting with others for change. So I will stop there. I know that many other people with you on that end will take it much further, and I'm only sorry not to be there with you. Thank you very much for this invitation.